The black SUV pulled up so quietly that nobody heard it over the fryer. It was Yemi who noticed first. She was standing behind her cart the way she always did. Apron strings double-knotted, tongs in her right hand, a line of construction workers stretching halfway down the block. She had just handed a brisket sandwich to a man named Curtis when she looked up and saw the car door open. And then she saw him. She recognized the walk before she recognized the face. The way a person carries themselves when they're used to rooms going quiet when they enter. The suit was charcoal gray. The shoes were the kind of shoes you only notice because you've never seen anything quite like them. He was holding a yellow envelope in one hand and a single sunflower in the other. Yemi's tongs stopped midair. Curtis turned around to see what she was staring at. "Ma'am," he said. "You all right?" She wasn't sure, because the man walking toward her across the gravel lot, past the orange pylons and the surveyor's stakes, and the half-poured foundation of what would eventually become a luxury condo tower, was the same man she had met at the Shoppers Drug Mart on Dundas Street West 14 months ago. On the worst Tuesday of her life. The Tuesday she had $11.47 in her bank account and a sick mother at home and a box of oatmeal and 2 cans of soup in her basket. And the man in front of her in line couldn't pay for his groceries. She hadn't thought twice. She hadn't even thought once. Let me take you back. 14 months ago, Yemi Adora was 31 years old, and she was running out of options in a city that did not seem to know she existed. She had come to Toronto from Accra 8 years earlier on a student visa, finished her diploma in culinary arts at George Brown, overstayed longer than she should have while trying to get her paperwork in order, and spent the better part of 3 years working cash jobs in restaurant kitchens that paid her less than they paid everyone else, and knew she couldn't complain about it. She chopped onions until her eyes stopped watering, not because they adjusted, but because she simply ran out of tears for things that small. Her mother, Mama Ya, had flown in from Ghana the year before on a visitor visa to help with Yemi's youngest cousin's new baby. She was supposed to stay for 6 weeks. Then Mama Ya got sick. A kidney infection that turned into something more complicated. Then something more complicated than that. The visitor visa expired while she was still in the hospital. The immigration lawyer cost money Yemi did not have. Yemi did what people do when the walls close in. She cooked, not in a restaurant, in her apartment, jollof rice, kelewele, groundnut soup, wake on Fridays. She posted on Facebook, then Instagram, then a neighborhood app. She got a second-hand steam table from a kitchen's supply auction in Etobicoke. She found a spot, not a permit, a spot. Outside the construction site on Adelaide, where a crew of 400 workers showed up every morning at 6:30 and had limited options for lunch within walking distance. She called it Yemi's. No last name, no logo. Just a hand-painted sign on foam board that she reattached to the cart with zip ties every morning because the wind kept taking it. The first week she sold 43 meals. The second week, 61. By the third month she was selling out before noon, turning people away, writing names down in a notebook so the regulars had a guaranteed order. She was building something. Quietly, carefully, the way you build things when you know how fast they can fall apart. That Tuesday in November, she had gone to Shoppers after the lunch rush to pick up medication for Mama Ya and a few groceries. Her cart had the oatmeal, the 2 cans of soup, a bag of ginger, Mama Ya's prescription, and a box of crackers. She had done the math in her head 3 times. $11.47 was enough. Barely, but enough. The man in front of her was maybe 50, or maybe younger, and just tired in that particular way that makes people look older than they are. He was wearing a canvas jacket with a torn pocket. His groceries were already on the belt. Bread, a carton of eggs, a can of baked beans, a liter of milk. When the cashier said the total, he patted his jacket, then his back pocket, then his jacket again. "I'm sorry," he said. "I think I left I'm sorry." The cashier, a teenager who looked like she wanted to be anywhere else, started reaching for the void button. Yemi watched the man's face. Not the embarrassment. That was obvious, but something underneath it. Something that looked like the specific exhaustion of a person who has been embarrassed too many times in too short a stretch. She knew that look. She had worn it herself. "How much?" she said. The cashier looked at her. The man turned around. "How much is it?" Yemi said again. "14.63, the cashier said. Yemi opened her wallet. She had a 10 and a 5. She put both on the counter. She took the 0.37 change. She put it in her pocket without counting it. The man stared at her. "I can't. I don't know you." "The eggs will go bad if you leave them," Yemi said. She was already putting her own groceries back on the belt. He picked up his bags. He stood there another moment, like he was going to say something more. Something that would explain himself or thank her in a way that felt adequate. Nothing felt adequate. She could see that on his face, too. "God bless you," he said finally. "He already has," she said, though she wasn't entirely sure she believed it that particular Tuesday. She paid for her own groceries with her debit card, held her breath until the machine beeped approved, and walked out into the November cold with $11.47 minus $14.63, meaning she had to round up the overdraft she'd been trying to avoid. She did not tell Mama Ya about the 14.63 cents. She made the oatmeal stretch 3 days. Now here's what Yemi did not know when she handed that 10 and that 5 to the cashier. She did not know the man's name was Desmond Kwaiko. She did not know that Desmond Kwaiko had, 14 months earlier, been the co-founder and chief development officer of a real estate investment firm called Apex Meridian Group, which had assets under management of approximately $1.9 billion Canadian, and was actively developing 4 mixed-use projects across the GTA. She did not know that the reason Desmond was at a Shoppers Drug Mart on Dundas at 3 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, buying bread and eggs with cash he apparently didn't have, was that he had spent the previous 72 hours in a kind of private freefall that he had not told anyone about, not his partners, not his lawyer, not his ex-wife. She did not need to know any of that. She just saw a man who needed bread and eggs. What happened after that Tuesday is the part of the story that Yemi only found out, piece by piece, much later, from people who had no reason to lie. Desmond had walked to his car, a leased BMW he was about 2 payments behind on, and he had sat there in the Shoppers parking lot for 45 minutes. He said later that the woman in the queue had not looked at him like he was broken. She had looked at him like he was a person who had run short on a Tuesday, which is a thing that happens to people, and she had done something about it without making him feel like a charity case. He said that was the thing. She hadn't lowered her voice or made a face. She had just asked how much. He drove home. He slept for 11 hours, which he hadn't done in months. He woke up at 4 in the morning, and he started making calls. What came next is not a miracle. It is just what happens sometimes when a person who was drowning finds their footing again. Desmond renegotiated the terms with his lenders. He brought in a new equity partner. He restructured one of the troubled projects, sold another to a REIT at a figure his accountant called better than expected given the circumstances. By spring, he was not merely solvent. He was, by any reasonable measure, back. He looked for the woman. He didn't have her name. He had a Shoppers Drug Mart on Dundas West, a Tuesday afternoon in November. A woman in a dark green jacket who wore her hair in braids and spoke with an accent he thought was Ghanaian. He asked the cashier. The cashier had been transferred to the Bloor location. He asked that cashier, who remembered the moment. Yeah, she just put the money down, like it was nothing, but not the name. He hired someone to find her. That sounds stranger than it was. He asked a researcher, someone his firm used for due diligence, to look for a food cart vendor in the Adelaide Street Construction District, Ghanaian, runs a lunch service, possibly unlicensed. The researcher came back in 4 days. Her name was Yemi Adara. She sold wakyai and jollof and brisket sandwiches from a cart she'd named after herself. She had a Facebook page with 2,300 followers. She had a problem. The problem had a name. His name was Gary Fitch. Gary Fitch was a property manager for the company that held the lease on the ground-level commercial space along the Adelaide Strip. He had submitted 3 formal complaints to the city of Toronto about Yemi's cart: unlicensed food vending, obstruction of pedestrian access, inadequate sanitation, and he had done it in a way that was technically accurate and completely dishonest. Yemi was not unlicensed. She had a street food vendor permit she had applied for and waited 7 months to receive. She was not obstructing access. She had measured the clearance herself, consulted with the site foreman, moved the cart 6 inches east when he asked her to. Her cart passed every inspection it was ever given. What Gary Fitch actually wanted was the lunch traffic. He had a client, a national sandwich chain, looking to take over a ground-floor unit, and the chain's location analyst had flagged that a competing vendor directly outside the building was a problem for their projections. Gary had tried twice to lease Yemi a unit inside the building at a rate she couldn't afford. When she said no, he started making calls. Yemi had received the first notice from the city on a Monday morning in August. She had gone home that night and sat at the kitchen table and tried not to cry in front of Mama Ya. "What is it, my daughter?" Mama Ya said, because mothers always know. "Nothing, Mama, just paperwork." Mama Ya put her hand over Yemi's hand on the table. Her hands were thinner now than they used to be. "You didn't come all this way to be stopped by a piece of paper. I know, Mama. I raised you in Accra. You sold groundnuts at school when you were 9 to save for a bicycle. You didn't get the bicycle, but you saved the money. I know. What happened to the money? I bought books. You bought books." Mama Ya patted her hand. "So, what are you going to do about the paper?" Yemi had hired a paralegal. She had responded to every notice. She had shown up to every hearing. She had kept her cart immaculate, kept her records, kept every receipt. She was not going to make it easy for them. But the second notice came, and then a third. And then Gary Fitch had apparently escalated to someone at the city who owed him a favor because Yemi received a registered letter in September informing her that her permit was under review and she would need to cease operations pending the outcome. She had until October 1st. She told Curtis, the regular, who told the crew, and by that afternoon, 37 construction workers had signed a handwritten letter on a piece of drywall paper saying that Yemi's was the best lunch they'd had in years, and the city would be making a mistake. The site foreman, a man named Bia Ozi, who was Ghanaian Canadian and had been eating Yemi's waki twice a week since she opened, drove to City Hall himself to deliver it. It helped. But it didn't fix anything. The review was still the review. On the last Friday of September, Yemi packed up the cart at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The line was still going. She told each person she was sorry. A few of them just stood there. Curtis didn't say anything. He just nodded very slowly and tipped his hard hat. She drove the cart back to her apartment, with the sign still zip-tied to the side. She parked it in the underground lot. She sat in her car for a long time. She thought about Mama Ya's hands on the table. She thought about the bicycle she never bought. She went upstairs and made soup. What she did not know, what she couldn't have known, was that Desmond Quaco had found her 2 weeks before the permit was pulled. He had driven to Adelaide Street on a Wednesday and stood at the back of her line for 45 minutes because he hadn't wanted to cut in front of anyone. When he finally got to the front, Yemi had looked at him with the expression of someone who processes 300 orders a day and has learned to look at faces without really seeing them. "Jollof or wake?" she said. "Wake," he said, with everything he paid. He stepped aside. He watched her for a few minutes. Then he left without saying anything, because he realized he didn't know what to say, and also because he had already made a call on the way over, and there were things that needed to be done before he said anything at all. He called his legal team that afternoon. He called his city contacts the next morning. He had a meeting with someone at the licensing department that he would later describe only as a conversation that needed to happen. He also called a friend who was a journalist at the Toronto Star and suggested, casually, that there might be a story worth looking at about a vendor permit being challenged in the Adelaide construction district and the property manager behind the complaints having an undisclosed commercial interest in the outcome. The story ran on a Thursday. Gary Fitch did not return the journalist's calls. The sandwich chain's location analyst sent an internal email that was later obtained under a Freedom of Information request saying the Adelaide site was no longer suitable. Gary Fitch's client found a different location in Liberty Village. The permit review was closed without action on a Friday morning. Yemi found out about it from a voicemail from the city clerk's office while she was at the grocery store. She stood in the cereal aisle for a full minute before she called it back to make sure she had understood correctly. She opened the cart again on Monday. She sold out in 90 minutes. She still didn't know why the review had been dropped. She assumed Bia Osi's letter had helped. She assumed the paralegal's responses had helped. She didn't know about the journalist. She didn't know about the legal team. She didn't know about Desmond. That's the thing about people who help you from behind. You can't see them working. The day Desmond came back, the day with the black SUV and the charcoal suit and the sunflower, was a Thursday in January, 7 weeks after Yemi had reopened. She was deep in the lunch rush. The line was 18 people. Curtis was at the front asking for extra hot sauce. Yemi heard the car before she saw it, just barely, over the sound of the fryer and the wind coming off the lake. She looked up. She recognized the walk. Then the face. She had served this man a wakai 3 months ago. She didn't know his name, but she remembered his face, because she remembered all of them. 300 a day, 7 days a week, every face filed somewhere in the back of her mind, the way a person files things they might need later. He walked up to her cart. The line didn't part for him. These were construction workers. They didn't part for anyone. But he waited. He stood at the back, and he waited until it was his turn. When he got to the front, he put the envelope on the counter. "I don't want food today," he said. Yemi looked at him. She looked at the envelope. She looked at the sunflower, which he was holding a little stiffly, because he was not the kind of man who regularly carried sunflowers. "I think you have the wrong person," she said. "You were at the Shoppers on Dundas. November, a year ago November, you paid for a man's groceries." Yemi was quiet. "That was me," he said. The line behind him had gone quiet in that gradual way that lines go quiet when something is happening at the front that isn't about sandwiches. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "You needed bread," she said. "I needed more than bread." He slid the envelope forward. "I want to tell you some things, but first, please open that." She wiped her hands on her apron. She picked up the envelope. She opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was on the letterhead of a law firm she didn't recognize. It took her 2 full reads to understand what it said. It said that an anonymous donor had established a fund for the purpose of legal representation and immigration processing on behalf of Yemi Adora and her mother, Mama Ya Adora, in their matters before the Immigration and Refugee Board of Canada. It said the fund was fully capitalized. It said the firm had been retained and was ready to begin work immediately upon her consent. It said, at the bottom in plain language, "You don't owe anyone anything. This is a gift." Yemi looked up. Desmond looked back at her. He was not smiling exactly. He was doing something with his face that was somewhere between a smile and an apology. "You were going to lose your cart," he said. "We made sure you didn't." "We," she said. "My team, my legal people." He paused. "I know you didn't ask for help. I didn't. I know." He looked at his shoes briefly, then back at her. "You didn't ask me for help in November either. You just saw that I needed it." Curtis, who had been standing 6 feet away with his hot sauce, cleared his throat. Nobody said anything for a moment. "I have a business proposal," Desmond said. "If you want to hear it, not today. I know you're working. But I would like to sit down with you and talk about what this cart could be, what you could build, with proper licensing, a permanent location, the kind of support you shouldn't have had to build alone." He put the sunflower on the counter next to the envelope. "You make the best wakyai I've had since I left Accra. You're Ghanaian," she said. It wasn't a question. "Kumasi," he said. "Left in '99, Accra," she said. "Left in 2016. Something shifted between them. Not a smile, just recognition. The particular recognition of two people from the same place who ended up on the same piece of cold pavement on the other side of the world. "Is Thursday good?" she said. "Thursday is perfect," he said. She handed him a container of waki. He tried to pay. She waved it off. "You needed it in November," she said. "I'm guessing you need it now too." He laughed. Properly, fully, the way people laugh when something catches them completely off guard. He took the container. He turned to go. Curtis leaned over. "Ma'am," he said quietly. "Who was that?" "A customer," Yemi said. She picked up her tongs. "Who's next?" What happened with the business proposal is a longer story, and one Yemi will probably tell better than I can. What I can tell you is that by the following spring, Yemi's had moved from a foam board sign on a cart to a permanent awning above a ground floor unit on Adelaide Street, 2 blocks from where Gary Fitch had tried to have her removed. The unit was small, but the kitchen was real. She hired 2 people, then 4. She kept the cart because the workers wanted the cart, so on Fridays she took it out herself and ran the line the way she always had. Apron double-knotted, tongs in her right hand. Mama Ya got her status sorted by November. She was at the restaurant the day the letter came. She was sitting at the table near the window, the one Yemi had put there specifically for her, eating kelawele and reading a Twi language magazine she'd found at the market on Roncesvalles. When Yemi showed her the letter, Mama Ya read it twice. Then she folded it very carefully and put it on the table. "Good," she said. "That's all you're going to say? What else?" Mama Ya spread her hands. "You saved for the bicycle. You bought books. Good things take the shape they need to take." She picked up her kelawele. "Now sit down. You've been standing since 6 o'clock. Yemi sat down. She thought about a Tuesday in November. A man with a torn pocket who couldn't pay for bread and eggs. 14.63 she hadn't had and gave anyway. She thought about what it cost her and what it came back as. Not the business, not the permit, not even Mama Ya's status, though that was everything. She thought about the moment she looked at a stranger in a checkout line and made the only decision that made sense to her, which was to see him as a person who needed something small on a hard day, and to do the small thing, because she could. That's the whole story. Really, everything else is just what followed. Now, before you go, I want to ask you something. If you had been standing behind that man in line, if you had seen him patting his pockets, if you had $14.63 in your hand, and not much more than that, what would you have done? Be honest with yourself. Drop a comment. Tell us where in Canada you're watching from tonight. And if this story moved you, pass it to someone who needs to hear it. We'll be back next week with another story from the community. Until then, take care of each other out there.